Okay, folks, we're back. Thank you for joining us again. We're going to move right along, and I'd like to welcome Brian Brandt, an executive planning professional with Strategic Financial Solutions, to come up to the podium to introduce our next presenter. Strategic Financial Solutions is a silver sponsor of the Manufacturing Conference. Strategic Financial Solutions is more than a financial firm. They are advocates for the financial futures of your company and your people. The company's process, the 4 R's, recruit, retain, reward, retire, coordinates the design, administration, funding, and implementation of retirement and executive benefit programs. Strategic Financial Solutions plans are designed to successfully retire and reward your key employees and executives. Please help me welcome Brian Brandt, but I'm going to turn it over to Brian Brandt now.
Thank you, John. Appreciate the round of applause. John, I just have to say that business idea that you and Aspen had 16 or 17 years ago to start a newspaper in Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, and talk business and maybe do a few events, I think it has legs. I think it's going to work. As a testament of this event, being able to adapt and innovate to have this type of event via the World Wide Web is pretty cool. So. Thank you, John, for the introduction of Strategic Financial Solutions. To break it down for you, we help people retire. And we do that through working with businesses headquartered here in Eastern Iowa. Many of them have locations around the country. 1/3 of them, we work with over 50, so about 1/3 of them explicitly state that they're in the manufacturing business. It might even be part of their name. We would argue that all of our companies that we work with, all of our clients and all of us benefit from the manufacturing industry. Without manufacturing, we wouldn't have freight to ship, we wouldn't have as much insurance to write, and we certainly wouldn't have as much beer to drink. So our clients thank the manufacturing sector, and we're proud to sponsor this event today. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Joshua Wright. Josh is going to discuss how skill shapes and skill gaps that define the manufacturing sector are rapidly evolving. Josh serves as the Executive Vice President of Community Insights for Emsi, a labor market analytics firm. He leads a team whose mission is to help communities prosper. Pretty good mission. They impact this with unparalleled workforce data, strategies, and training. Josh regularly writes and presents on data best practices and emerging trends in economic development, regional workforce analysis, and corporate talent and location decisions. Speaking of locations, Josh is broadcasting live today from the state of Idaho. Josh, the Zoom screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Appreciate that. Thank you for the kind and warm introduction. As was mentioned, I am here in Idaho, Moscow, Idaho, in the Pacific Northwest. It is 9:20 here in the morning on Friday. It's great to be with you all virtually. We often get, here in Idaho, we often get confused with Iowans. I don't know how often that happens for you all in getting Iowa and Idaho confused. You guys are a little more well-known than we are, but we can share in that for sure. Anyway, thank you to the Corridor Business Journal for inviting me to speak. I've had the privilege of working and meeting with a number of different organizations in Iowa City and Cedar Rapids, and we work throughout the state of Iowa providing labor analytics, so I'm excited to be here today. I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started here. Hold on just one second. My apologies. Make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Okay. Okay, so I've got different monitors here. I think you should be able to all see my main, the main presentation. Let me minimize that. So here we go. So this is our agenda for the day. I'm going to talk a little bit about just who Emsi is, talk about why we're looking, just get a quick overview of manufacturing, the manufacturing industry in Iowa, why the focus on skills, and what do we mean by skill shapes and skill gaps, and then focus on a couple different roles and things that were manifesting itself as we look at the data in Iowa coming through the pandemic. So we're going to talk about production and manufacturing, but also some industrial and mechanical engineering roles, and what we see as some specific skills that really jump out to us in Iowa, where they're both either unique in the state, or there are some either undersupplied talent in those areas that, as you as business leaders, community leaders, HR directors could be thinking about, and then what to do about that. Okay, so hopefully you all see my screen here. We are, MZs mission is to use labor market data to inform and connect three distinct audiences. And those are people looking for work, and people in the labor market, educators who train those people for work, and then companies who hire those people. So those three all work in an ecosystem in a region that every region is different, whether that's a metropolitan area or micropolitan, small rural area. There's all kinds of different regional variations there. So we are proud to present and provide data to hundreds of organizations, whether they're companies or economic development organizations or colleges, universities, to understand local labor market dynamics. And we do that using 3 or 4 really core types of data. Standard labor market information from the BLS, the state labor market agencies like the Iowa has, job posting analytics from the online, scraping the web to look at online job ads, and then resumes and profiles from sources like LinkedIn and Facebook and GitHub to understand the supply of talent and the skills coming out of that work from working adults in America and across the state of Iowa, and then compensation data as well. So those are the 4 real key areas that we focus on. So as I go through this here, I'm going to focus just quickly on, let's just set the stage for some high-level employment type statistics for manufacturing in Iowa. I'm not going to do a huge amount of this. Some of this will be well known to a lot of you. Some of this might serve as some new insights for you. So manufacturing is the 2nd largest industry in the state by employment, and it's the largest private sector industry. So government is number 1. You can see there on the chart on the right of the screen. Manufacturing is the largest contributor to the state's GDP, or regional, what we call GRP, which is gross regional product, the final kind of value added, all goods and services. There's a few different terms for GDP and GRP, and we look at that by industry, by region, by county, by state. Food manufacturing, and we'll get into this, is the biggest contributor inside manufacturing in terms of its contribution to the state's economy from a GRP perspective. There are just under 230,000 jobs in manufacturing in Iowa. Iowa has the highest, a really strong concentration, not the highest concentration if you look at all across states. Indiana, Wisconsin, a few others have higher concentrations of manufacturing, but basically from a per capita, per worker basis, Iowa is about 66% higher than the national average based off of the amount of workers the state has and percentage, the share of those that work in manufacturing. So that's, we call that location quotient, concentration measure, very robust, meaning that it is manufacturing. That just indicates the importance of manufacturing in Iowa. This is a long, don't expect to see all of these, I look through all of these sectors here. It's a table of every kind of subsector. These are called 3-digit industries. This is actually can get a lot more detailed than this, but this still gives you a lay of the land of the type of manufacturing in Iowa. You see food manufacturing and machinery manufacturing make up about 100,000 jobs. This was pre-pandemic. So this is as of at the end of 2019, about 100,000 jobs and about $14 billion in GRP. Manufacturing contributes about $32 billion to the state's economy from a GRP perspective, and 14 million of that comes from food and machinery manufacturing. There's been some really robust growth in some of the other smaller sectors like electrical equipment, appliance and component manufacturing. Beverage and tobacco product manufacturing is growing. But robust food manufacturing and beverage manufacturing is also indicated by whether that's beer manufacturing and other types of food that's coming from in great parallel to the robust agricultural sector in Iowa. So that's just a very, we could go into a much deeper breakdown of the industries and also the people, the types of workers that fit inside those industries. And the majority of them in Iowa, like they are, really this is where the data starts to break down from the traditional sources, because the majority of those jobs in food, whether you're talking about food manufacturing or machinery manufacturing, really are a mix of workers like team assemblers, welders, just general laborers. And if inside food manufacturing, you're going to get more meat trimmers, slaughters, packaging operators. But the types of occupations are pretty standard across when you look at from state to state, region to region manufacturing. Where the difference is and where you can really start to understand how the labor market is evolving is through skills. And when we talk about skills, we're talking about the skills that employers put in their job postings and employees put in their resumes and profiles. They say, I have this skill, and an employer says, I want this skill. And then we look at that, where that match is. There's a pretty standard occupation data set that uses the standard occupation code system. And that's standard for the BLS to state labor market, whether you're looking at software developers, registered nurses, or machinists. However, what we do is we break those into career areas, sub-career areas. We look at the relation and then and the skills inside those career areas to understand the relationship of skills. And the skill, every role, every occupation, every person, every region has a unique shape, and there's skills that are manifest. And those manifest different from industry to industry, but also from company to company, even inside the same industry. So we can unpack these at the company level, at the industry level, at the regional level, and really get start to get a more granular sense of how the workforce is evolving in manufacturing in the state of Iowa. And that's what I'm going to unpack today. Some of this data, I'll give you just fair warning, is fairly dense. It takes a little bit to unpack. We don't have a ton of time today. So if you have questions, if you'd like to dig deeper into this, whether it's for your company or for a specific region, please, I'll have my contact information at the end. Happy to help you walk through that. When we talk about skill shapes, again, we're looking at overlapping skills and how they reveal the roles and how those roles, those key careers are interconnected. They lock into each other. So there's overlap between, where a communication skill and a design skill comes, and how important those are in a specific role. So we'll talk about that as well. There's some key questions like we talked about that skills can really answer: understanding supply and demand at a more granular level. What are the skill gaps? And a skill gap is essentially the shortage. Where there is more demand for a skill than there is, as indicated by the supply from those workers and what they're putting on their resumes and profiles. There's no perfect data to understand these, because not every person not every company posts online jobs. Not every individual has an online resume or profile, but we also benchmark this to job opening data from the government so that we can understand and tie this data to more rigorous data sets. There are weaknesses with every data set. We're a data company. We always like to say that there is no perfect data set out there. But as we combine data sets, as we understand and nuance these things together, we can get more actionable insights for companies as they hire and fill out their talent pipelines, for regions as they try to attract and develop talent, and for colleges and universities as they align their training, whether it's a workforce training program or four-year program, to the needs of employers. Okay, so let's talk about production and manufacturing here in Iowa from a skills perspective specifically. So up on the top left-hand corner, and I'm going to use my mouse to show this. Again, not super obvious as you look at this, but as you unpack it, things become pretty clear. Really, the big takeaway here is that production and inside traditional production and manufacturing roles, For the nation, top left, for the state of Iowa, fairly similar. What we have here is the supply of labor. These are, again, people, how many workers do we have? How many, based off of resumes and profiles and the jobs data we have, versus how much, what is, and this is on this x-axis, the horizontal axis. On the y, the y-axis, the vertical axis, we have the demand. And the demand is signaling, we get that signal again from those online job postings. If the 100 companies are saying, I need workers with machining and CNC systems, and there's fewer data sets, then that tells us that there's that there's a gap there. So this line going up, you see on both, is the equilibrium point between supply and demand. If you've ever taken any economics classes, you know the charting out, you know, supply and demand on a graph. The equilibrium point, so anything on the left-hand side here, above the line, is telling us that it's more, there is a higher demand than supply. If it's below the line, there's more supply than demand. There's actual potential oversupply of talent, which means those people will have a hard time finding jobs, or talent there, or they need to transition to more in-demand roles. Something's happening there. So again, above the line, more demand than supply. Below the line, more supply than demand. And you can see here, pretty similar in terms of the types of roles and skills that you start to see from the national manufacturing scene to Iowa: welding and soldering, floor operations, production management. But you can start to see here, whereas in the nation, there's actually a little bit of an oversupply. It's on the other side of the line for welding and soldering. There's actually a little bit of more demand than supply. There's a undersupply. There is a need for more welding and soldering in Iowa. And we see the same thing for production management, but we see a little bit of more oversupply, a little more workers than are demanded by employers in floor operations. And we'll start to see where this technical skills start to come from these. So this is, again, just a quick lay of the land between the nation and Iowa and manufacturing. So as we start to unpack these areas, these career areas, this is welding and soldering again. So you can see Iowa on the left, the nation on the right. This is a side-by-side comparison, specific skill gaps. The dark blue line is the demand for the skill. What are employers? What is the volume of demand from employers? How much do they need this skill? The lighter blue line is the supply. How much the supply is out there currently in Iowa or in the nation? You can start to see a couple things here really jump out. Plasma cutting. So if it doesn't show up in the nation, it doesn't show in Iowa, it doesn't mean it's not there. It just is not nearly as important as it is in one of the others. So in Iowa, plasma cutting is an important role, and it is a role where there is a gap. There are not enough workers that have plasma cutting skills. Welding, on the other hand, you see there's a lot of just traditional welding. There are a lot of people who say they have that skill, even more than what's demanded. Again, the dark blue line. The other one is, there's a couple other. Fabrication is the same, but you can start to see where there are actual gaps. Soldering, there is a gap. It's not as of an important role, because the farther left means if it's a shorter line, it means there's not as much. It isn't as significant of a role, but it's still fairly significant, and there's a big gap. There's not enough workers who have soldering skills. So you can start to see these side-by-side comparisons. Here's another example. This is machining and CNC systems. So again, we're getting in the nitty-gritty here with some skills data, but you can start to see in Iowa on the left, the nation on the right. Machining is pretty similar. You see the machining, there's a gap for machining both in the nation and Iowa right here. Lathes or lathing, you can see there's actually an oversupply nationally and an undersupply in Iowa. Jig borer, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly as a skill, doesn't show up in the national skill shape for the nation for machining and CNC systems. It does show up. That means it's more significant in Iowa, and there's a very big lack of people with that skill. Machine control, mechanical tools, CAD, shapers, very similar story. On the other hand, though, in the nation, some IT and math type of skills, trigonometry, geometry, G codes, those actually show up in the national manufacturing cluster, skills cluster, skill shape, and they don't really show up in Iowa. So you start to see, we can do any kind of these side-by-side comparisons. What makes Iowa unique? What are the skills that really driving that are surfacing, and you start to see some of these where there's a strength, those skills are needed. There's a strength compared to the nation. You know, if you're in a regional economic development and employers need, or, you know, that there are people who need a high level of machinists or computer aided manufacturing, being able to say, hey, we have the supply here. We have an ecosystem of companies. That is a good thing for either bringing companies in or saying, hey, we need to attract more workers because clearly we need more skills in machine controls. And this gap is pretty significant here. There's a tiny little bit of supply in machine controls and a lot of demand. So as we transition here, I want to talk about industrial and mechanical engineering as it relates to manufacturing. Mechanical engineering by itself, you think of industrial engineering as the industrial engineering as making the machines that then power manufacturing, similar to mechanical engineering. There is, if you remember the line for production and manufacturing, a lot of the roles were right around equilibrium. There wasn't this, but mechanical engineering, both for the nation and Iowa, way more demand than supply. These are all very demanded roles. And Iowa, even more so in a couple of these areas. Let's unpack this a little bit. In mechanical and computer-aided design, CAD and 3D modeling. So this is 3D modeling and computer-aided design, CAD and 3D modeling. You can start to see in Iowa what the big things that jump out in Iowa are new product development, manufacturing processes, product design, and those skills don't even show up in the nation. It means that this is a unique thing in manufacturing in Iowa. The same thing for software, like product management software, like PTC Windchill, and some of these other skills, really prevalent in Iowa, that where we don't see them nationally. And you can see AutoCAD, there's actually a little bit of oversupply in Iowa, but 3D modeling, a major gap, a major skills gap in 3D modeling. Same for product design, same for manufacturing processes. We talked about PTC Windchill as that product management software for manufacturers. I'm sure some of you are aware of that. Pneumatics is also one where, as we highlighted with these green circles, pneumatics in Iowa shows up in this cluster, in the skill shape, and it doesn't show up nationally. Same for PTC Windchill, as we mentioned earlier. Now there are some gaps. There's some oversupply of mechanical engineering as a broad new product development. This is where, as manufacturing evolves, becomes, you know, as advanced manufacturing just becomes manufacturing, these types of skills, whether they're technology skills, engineering skills, the hybridization of manufacturing is really becoming prevalent. Also notice some bigger gaps in some clear areas of whether we're talking about automation skills, as your manufacturers help establish best practices and actual processes, automation processes, and coding skills. Python shows up as not a hugely prevalent skill in Iowa mechanical engineering, but definitely showing up a little bit. Same with human-computer interaction and automation. These are bigger skills in Iowa than they are nationally. And we see that in the Midwest, in Indiana. We did a study for Purdue University looking at manufacturing in Indiana. I think similar to Iowa, where automation skills, there are people who need, workers who need to be able to implement those processes. And it's a catch-22, obviously. As more automation comes, maybe the need for fewer workers. At the same time, still those people who need to operate the machines, and there's not enough of those workers. Same for quality assurance skills. A lot of different, whether we're talking about CAPA or any kind of systems and standards processes, Iowa has gaps throughout this, where there are quality assurance type skills. So this is a signal for what kind of training and programs could the educational system or employers offer, because there are gaps throughout these skills. More demand, whether we're talking about lean manufacturing or CAPA or whatever, definitely more demand for those skills than what the people say they have. As we talk about, we haven't mentioned any specific companies, but all these companies obviously driving this data from the demand side because they're posting jobs. These are top posting companies looking for engineering roles in manufacturing. Some big players here, I mentioned it throughout the conference, whether we're talking about Rockwell Collins, Raytheon, Cargill, John Deere. And we can break these. What we do for companies is actually look at their job posting behavior. How are they posting for the right skills? should they tweak those job postings? What is the local labor market demand saying? Where should they be posting those jobs? That's how often we're helping companies think about their talent acquisition HR strategies. One last thing before I finish, I want to talk about prototyping and design. There's a really unique need and a unique opportunity here as we look at this, as we started looking at manufacturing and evolution of engineering, industrial engineering and manufacturing. Prototyping and design is certainly something that pops out in Iowa. And you can see here, there are a lot more skills on the left for Iowa in prototyping and design than nationally. So this is, again, inside industrial engineering for prototyping and design, a lot of gaps, whether we're talking about agile software development, JavaScript, or we're talking about systems engineering. And this is a unique, kind of a unique area that could Iowa can leverage as, hey, we are a center for prototyping and design. Industrial engineering is a benchmark of our manufacturing, and in that, whether we're talking for regional economic development or for companies who want to leverage that. There are also unique reskilling and upskilling and opportunities to get people into prototyping and design. We see a pretty clear overlap between UI, UX designers and prototypers and designers. And the biggest, as we look at the transition, so one thing we do with all these social profiles to see where people go from the first job to second job to third job to understand real life career pathways and career transitions. We see a majority of people who transition into prototyping and design for industrial engineering come from a UI, UX design background. Some of them come from mobile design and software development, and just a thin slice of them come from drafting and design, more civil engineering backgrounds. The skills that they need to add are here on the bottom. Some of these are usability, agile software development, HTML and CSS, some specific coding languages. And if they add those, they can be really valuable in the prototyping and design perspective to fill out the industrial engineering capacities for companies in Iowa. So as you see here, this one actually, this is just the skill shape for UX, UI design and the similarities between prototype. If there's an X, that means there's a skill gap in Iowa. So there's prototyping is clear deficiency in Iowa. You need prototyping skill is something that is certainly needed more. And that could be a clarion call for, again, any of the leaders there in the community of like, how do we leverage, how do we tap into that more? So just as a quick summary, Iowa from a production and manufacturing perspective mirrors the nation in a lot of ways. There are unique features in terms of a deeper presence of welding and soldering, machining, CNC, some safety related skills. Noticeable gaps though in industrial mechanical engineering, as we talked about. And then that unique focus on prototyping and design of product and software to help manufacturers is something where we see, as we look at coming out of the pandemic, this is an ability for manufacturing to become even more competitive in Iowa, is to lean on making sure that those workers are prevalent, that there are the supply of those type of workers to fill the needs of Iowa companies to become even more competitive and for manufacturing to become even more robust. So with that, thank you for your time. Happy to take any questions or answer anything.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. We do have a couple questions that we wanted to get to you before we conclude here in about 4 minutes. If you were giving some advice to a family who has a high schooler or maybe a middle schooler that wants to get a really good job in a few years, how would you recommend that student to continue their education or their skills education?
Yeah, it's a question that really requires probably a little more digging, but I would say, there are tools out there to understand, whether you take an interest assessment, understand what are those skills that you really want, what are those skills that you're most interested in developing, what are some of the skills even at a really younger age that you have started developing, where understand the in-demand careers in Iowa if you want to stay in Iowa, and say, how do I best fit that? But in terms of, for manufacturing, tapping into, getting experience and tapping into some of the local programs, even at a younger age, whether it's CTE program in a high school that goes into a quicker apprenticeship or 2-year program that then adds those valuable skills. So it's, I think there's assessments, linking that inventory, like understanding skill sets, in-demand skills. What are the best wages too? Looking at, we didn't really talk about compensation data, but one thing that research has shown is the more skills you can add, obviously, especially technical skills and those kind of softer personal skills, the more valuable you become to companies. And those are also then as value contribution, compensation generally follows that contribution. So becoming more, being able to make more money that way.
Great. One last question, but can you switch off your screen, Josh, your shared screen? Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, last question. How soon will we have updated data based on COVID impacts?
Yeah. Really what we're seeing, we're seeing data updated daily in some ways, and that's the job posting data, trending, like what are the day over day trends for employers as an early indicator. Job postings don't mean hiring, but we've got, MZ's been tracking that. We have a free job posting dashboard on our COVID resource page. I can share with you to look at Iowa trends in manufacturing and companies that are posting. The other thing though, the government is putting, they have monthly employment data. The job numbers just for the nation came out today, but there are monthly by industry kind of data that then lags a little bit. So we are starting to see what's happening, as of July, as of August, for some of that data. And then the more robust data that we really rely on, that's even more, is a little deeper. We'll start to, as we end the year, we already have Q1 data for a lot of the employment deep industry data from the BLS. That Q1 data has been released. Q2, which goes into the end of June, will be released here later in the year. And so there's a lag with some of the more robust data, but early indicator data, whether it's high level industry data or job posting data, is here. And I'm happy to share some of that with you if you're interested.
Well, great. Thanks so much, Josh, for joining us and sharing your insight with us.